RNC Night 1, America is Great. Night 2 of riots in Wisconsin. Jerry Seinfeld's case for a big NYC comeback, and the Wall Street Journal says lockdowns are blunt and costly. Welcome, friends, to the Buck Sexton Show. Great to have you here. I did watch the RNC last night, so I can tell you this. It was much better produced than I think many, including myself, many anticipated. It was much more compelling than certainly what we saw last week, just from a messaging standpoint, from a how well executed was this whole thing. The Republicans perhaps learned some lessons from watching the debacle of the Democrat convention, the virtual convention last week. But I've got to tell you, I thought last night really did put in to a clear choice in front of the American people, a choice that anybody should be able to make clearly and easily going forward. It's really not all that complicated when you think it through. And it's the RNC versus DNC simplified. The RNC is your option to vote for the America is Awesome party. Not that America is perfect, but America is awesome. It's a great country with great people, and our future is going to be very strong if we make the obvious choice of putting people in charge who also love this country. The DNC gives you the option of voting for the America sucks, but socialism will make it almost tolerable, probably still racist, though, party. That's your choice. That's your choice. A little bit more socialism, still going to be racist, of course, but a little bit more socialism, and maybe America won't be awful. That's what the Democrats want you to know, because they're upset at the country for voting for Donald Trump. They think we need to be punished. In fact, I believe that many of the people in prominent positions in the Democrat Party who watch the rioting, who watch the continued mayhem in Wisconsin and in other places, right? They try not to cover too much the BLM protest that then turns into something else, right? This is what we're always told. The way that they use language is fascinating, isn't it? A second day of peaceful protests gave way to clashes overnight in Wisconsin. Gave way? What does that mean? What do you mean gave way to? No, it led to. It led to. If I am walking around with a torch in my hands, setting fires, I am not giving way to arson of that building. I am leading up to it. Gave way. This construction of a passive voice. I know it seems minor, folks, but it's not minor at all. This is how propaganda works. This is how they try to help the left evade, the Democrat Party, the DNC, evade accountability for what is being done in its name. And there was even more of this. The New York Times, peaceful marches in Kenosha, Wisconsin, against the police shooting of a black man gave way to fires and destruction. The first one I read to you was CBS. This one is New York Times. Gave way. Why? Why the passive voice? This is interesting, isn't it? It's not that someone stabbed someone. It's that the knife, after a dispute, the knife went into a person's back, right? Takes away human agency. It takes away culpability. That's why they describe these things as they do. We'll get more into these continued protests and the insanity behind it in a little bit. But I wanted to start with what I thought was the highlights from last night. And the single most compelling speaker, and I give the RNC credit for setting it up the way they did, the single most memorable person to take the podium last night, in my opinion. Of course, people are entitled to their own view of these things, was Senator Tim Scott. Play clip 2.
He suffered the indignity of being forced out of school as a third grader to pick cotton, and he never learned to read or write. Yet, he lived long enough to see his grandson become the first African American to be elected to both the United States House and the United States Senate in the history of this country. Our family went from cotton to Congress in one lifetime. And that's why I believe the next American century can be better than the last. There are millions of families just like mine all across this nation, full of potential, seeking to live the American dream. And I'm here tonight to tell you that supporting the Republican ticket gives you the best chance of making that dream a reality.
Senator Tim Scott's words, I think, really hit home for a lot of people. And I think that it was particularly meaningful the way that he worked in his own family story as part of the narrative of America becoming a better country. America fulfilling the promise of the founders and the Constitution, which took a long time and a lot of fights, a lot of blood, a lot of tears, a lot of treasure, a lot of everything this country had to give to put us in a place where Senator Tim Scott can stand up before the American people and stand up before millions of viewers at the RNC and tell the tale of his own family and what they were able to accomplish. And there's a very clear difference in not just vision of the past, but how the past influences the future of this country between Democrats and Republicans. Tim Scott looks at what used to be and where we are now and says, look at how magnificent our progress has been. Democrats look at the past and say, look at how awful we were. The only people that can be in charge today are those who recognize how terrible we were in the past and are constantly reminding this country of its own awfulness. There's a great irony here in that the so-called progressives are always negating the progress of this nation in order to get more power. They claim that we haven't made the strides we have on equality, not equity, on equality for women, on equality for African Americans, on equality for Native Americans, on equality for all peoples, for the LGBT community, right? All of these areas that we talk about, and you see what this country is today, how well we do get along as a nation, and how much better we would get along if it were not for the identity politics obsessed hucksters, frauds, con men of the Democrat Party. It's remarkable. And the DNC last week was all about telling you how terrible everything is under Donald Trump and failure of leadership, failure. It wasn't a compelling pitch for why Joe Biden is going to be a great leader for the country, because that's not really a possible pitch. We've already seen Democrats on multiple occasions given the opportunity to elevate Joe Biden to the highest office in the land, and they practically laughed in his face. They're like, come on, Joe. You really should be a guy, who's selling used appliances in, Delaware, right? You really should be that guy. And somehow you've managed to just hang on as a senator from Delaware for decades and decades. It's so often true in life, folks, that you don't have to be the best. You don't even have to be the first. You just have to be the longest serving, be the longest in the role. And all of a sudden, it's true in a lot of things. It's true in media. It's true in politics. Just be around long enough, and eventually people will act like you're really good at something. But this is certainly the case with Joe Biden and with the vision of the country the Democrats laid out last week versus the vision that we have this week underway right now, the creation of this narrative from the Republican Party. If you watched this last night, there were one or two speeches, and I won't, I don't feel the need to single them out. Don't want to be negative. I'm sure you all, I don't know. And this wasn't one of the two that I thought were ineffective. I thought Nikki Haley's speech was good. I'm not as enthusiastic about Nikki Haley for 2024 as some other folks who are listening to this, which is fine. I have reservations. But look, I had questions about Trump when he was running in 2015, and I was wrong. So maybe I'm wrong about Nikki Haley. though I doubt it. But anyway, I could be. I could be wrong. There were a couple of speeches that I thought fell a little bit flat. But more importantly, there was a speech that was one of those that, at least for me, Tim Scott's was the single most powerful, because Tim Scott is also a national level political figure, and there's a lot about him that is just admirable and impressive. But Maximo Alvarez, who fled communist Cuba, his speech last night was, for me, in many ways, the most powerful. He was somebody who has, many of our finest Americans, in my opinion, are those like Maximo Alvarez, who have fled communism and came here to America to embrace the freedom, opportunity, and promise of this country with open arms. And there are few who love liberty as much as those who have had it taken away somewhere else and fought to restore it by getting to our shores, and then once here, they defend it fiercely. One of my dear friends and advisors and mentors fled communist Cuba. And to this day, I believe that if you gave him a rifle and told him to storm the shores at the Bay of Pigs, he'd want to give it another shot. Some of the most freedom-loving, patriotic people I've ever met fled the Khmer Rouge for America, fled Castro's Cuba, fled from behind the Iron Curtain of the Soviet Union. They come here, and for them, it's not rhetorical. They have experienced hell, in a sense, and now are living, if not in heaven, the closest thing the world has to it, for those who believe that being in control of your own destiny is so essential, that you can't really live a full life without the freedom to choose. So I thought Maximo Alvarez's speech last night, he struck a chord with me. It was emotional, and I wasn't expecting that at all. I wasn't expecting to be watching the RNC and see somebody who was speaking about love for this country, but also the threat that this country faces. Can you imagine being Mr. Alvarez, being in this country, and then seeing the rise of socialism and seeing this left-wing Marxist movement, not just of BLM, but the cultural Marxism that has overtaken our news media and academia, and now even infiltrated the HR and equity departments, human equity departments of corporate America. And to see that somehow there are people in this country, a lot of them, and yes, they are Democrats, they are Biden voters, who have not learned these very painful lessons of history, who don't seem to understand that the reason communism fails every time it is tried is because it makes fundamental, incorrect assumptions about human nature, about morality, and about society. It's not that it isn't well practiced in some places at some times, it's that it is fundamentally wrong. Maximo Alvarez understands that, and I thought that if there was one speech other than Tim Scott's that I'd remember from last night, it was his. But ultimately, all you had to do was tune in for a little bit, and you saw an RNC talking about promises made, promises kept, about a Trump administration that is really trying to provide results for the American people. No one's giving Donald Trump a Nobel Peace Prize just for being Trump, right? The news media has done everything they can, not just to stand in the way of his policies, but to tear down his administration, to help in the actual sabotage and prosecution, if they could, of his administration. And yet, when you look at the results on deregulation, energy policy, jobs creation, trade deals, standing up to China, there are a whole range of areas. Yes, not a complete wall, but a few hundred miles of wall, and a total shift in our conversation about immigration away from amnesty. There are a number of areas you'd have to say the president has delivered, critical areas, ones that have made the country more prosperous, more free. And on this law and order issue, I think the Democrats may be the authors of their own electoral demise. We shall see. I certainly hope that's the case. We'll be talking more about what's going on in Kenosha today, but I sit here and I can't imagine that there is anybody who understands American politics who could have sat around in May as part of the Biden campaign strategy and thought, you know what would really go well for us right now? If our entire political apparatus, if the Democrat establishment, never mind the emotionally and mentally unstable community organizers and activist class, if the Democrat establishment thought it was a good idea to be cheerleaders for arson, vandalism, looting, rioting, and assaults on police. If Trump and the Republicans can't win when the Democrats are taking that position, I'm just going to say it, they don't deserve to win. But I'm feeling pretty good about things right now. What does COVID-19 have to do with losing your home? Well, the FBI says that cybercrime is up 75%. You see, the legal title to your home, to all of our homes, exists online. Home title theft is a cybercrime. You see, cyber criminals find the title to your home and then forge your signature on a quitclaim deed and refile as the new owner of your home. You're off the title. They destroy you by taking out loans against your home, steal the cash, and stick you with the payments. You may not even find out about this until the foreclosure notice arrives. First things first, go to HomeTitleLock.com and register your address to see if you're already a victim. Then use code BUCK for 30 free days of protection. That's code BUCK at HomeTitleLock.com. HomeTitleLock.com, code BUCK. You'll get 30 free days of protection. You can also check to see if you're already a victim of this growing crime. Take action today with Home Title Lock.
When you compare the message of what's coming this week to what we saw in Delaware last week, how do you see it differing?
I think the choice in this election is clear. The American people are going to see a great contrast. You have President Trump, who said that we're not going to shut this economy down again. And to hear Joe Biden actually talking about shutting down our country again just shows how out of step he is with the progress that we've all made as a country. I know Joe Biden last week said that democracy is on the ballot. Well, President Trump and I believe that the economy is on the ballot, the future of this country is on the ballot, law and order is on the ballot, and we're going to take that case to the American people.
Think about how the vice president here, Pence, so we're very appreciative that he joined us last week himself to tell us about everything. Think about how Pence lines all of this up, discussing actual policies, what's on the ballot, versus what he notes the Democrats say democracy itself is on the ballot. That's a claim that if there is not a transfer of power from Trump and the Republican Party to the Democrats, that there won't be elections, right? That there's an implied threat with a democracy itself. Democracy is a process. So how is democracy on the ballot? Oh, only if your claim, which is what the Democrats are claiming, only if the claim is that if the Democrat Party does not win, there will not be a democratic process anymore to elect people to higher office in this republic, because we are not in a pure democracy, as we know. We are a republic, but it is a democratic form of electing, or it is under a democratic foundation, right? The people elect their representatives, or really the people vote for electors who elect their representatives, but let's not get too deep into the weeds on that. I think that this is an important distinction. They're creating false narratives. Democrats are coming up with things that are not reality-based to mobilize their voters and to get engagement from registered Democrats all across the country. The post office conspiracy nonsense and the democracy is on the ballot. They're making it sound existential for our system, which is a lie. Is that fair? Is what I'm telling you fair about the Democrats and how they claim that the future of our system of government itself is at stake if they do not win? Because I make a somewhat of a counter claim to that Democrats plan to use their power to dramatically alter the demographics and the voting population of this country, notably through amnesty, so that the Republican Party will become something of an intellectual curiosity, a relic of another time in American politics, but not one with any real punch, certainly not one with any real political power or authority. And so with that, then, I would ask you all, hold on a second. How is there a difference? What is the difference between these two? Well, you see, the Democrats, I'm not saying are going to hijack the system if they lose, right? They're not going to hijack the system. They're just seeking to undermine it. They're seeking to make it so people don't believe in it. But it seems the Democrat premise is that Republicans won't even respect the electoral process, whatever it is. That they're effectively claiming Republicans will have a coup. That's different from saying that the other side will use its power to politically destroy America and to destroy the Republican Party. No, they're just saying that it might as well be Trump telling tanks to circle around the White House, I'm not leaving. That's what Democrats claim about Republicans, which is completely nuts. And if you think that this rhetoric that I'm using is in any way exaggerated, or I know you know it's not, but that's a good way to tee up our little comment here from Nancy Pelosi. Remember, I'm not pulling from random commentators on MSNBC for this, people who are desperate for attention or some kind of a paycheck. Here is the ultra establishment, very, very wealthy, ruthless and conniving, third most powerful person in the federal government, Nancy Pelosi, who refers to Republicans as enemies of the state. Play clip 1.
We take an oath to protect and defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And sadly, the domestic enemies to our voting system and our honoring our Constitution are right at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue with their allies in the Congress of the United States. But again, let's just get out there mobilize, organize, and not let the president deter anybody from voting. And again, support the postal system, which is election central. They're doing everything they can. Suppress the vote with your actions, scare people, intimidate by saying law enforcement will be there, diminish the role of the postal system in all of this. It's really actually shameful. Enemies of the state.
Enemies of the state. That's how Nancy Pelosi refers to her Republican colleagues here. And she singles out the Congress. Enemies of the state. That's very, very strong language. Aren't we all supposed to cry and gnash our teeth and rend our garments and prostrate ourselves in agony out on the streets because Trump refers to the media as the enemy of the people? I think increasingly it's quite clear the media overall, obviously not everyone, and I'm in the media, so there's clearly limitations to this in my own opinion. But generally speaking, the news media are, in fact, the enemies of the people. They are working against our common interest. They're willing to pull us apart for their own amusement, their own virtue signaling, their own professional advancement. It's not quite clear which one they necessarily do the most of, but all of those things are accurate. All those things are true. And this post office theory they keep coming back to is just simply bonkers. And they're not going to let it go. It doesn't matter if it's debunked. It doesn't matter if it's clear that it's not true. It's very obvious to anyone paying attention that this is meant to serve a purpose. And the purpose is to make sure that if the Democrats were to lose this upcoming election, they would have a built-in excuse emotionally and politically. They would take, it's not just it makes them, sleep better at night. To live in that delusion, it's also that they would then use this as a means of political mobilization to take action against the Republicans based on the lie that the election was stolen from them. Trump tweeted out this morning, for our country to be sending 80 million unsolicited ballots is very unfair and a roadmap to disaster. Even recent, small, and easier to control elections which did this are a catastrophic disaster. Fraudulent and missing ballots like never seen before. 20 and 30% off. All caps. Stop! Exclamation point. Indeed. The president understands that all those ballots floating around there, even, let's say for a second, let's take them at their word. Let's listen to what the Democrat point is here. Why would someone commit fraud? We know people do commit fraud in pretty much every major election, and we catch very little of it, but let's play along for a second. Even if under this scheme of mass mail-in balloting, even if the reality was that not a single person intentionally, actively committed fraud, right, was engaged in the process of committing fraud, understand that there's an enormous risk to the integrity of the election just because it's so obvious that one could commit fraud and get away with it. Right. So the perception of the possibility of fraud becomes its own undermining narrative. So after the election happens, you don't have to prove that anything was amiss. You just, if you're a Democrat and if you don't like the outcome, right, of course, if Biden wins, there was no fraud, everything's perfect, amazing, democracy lives, whatever. But if Trump ends up winning, which I think Democrats are recognizing now is a real possibility, this is going to be very close, a very close election. If, in fact, Trump does win, they don't care whether they can prove there was fraud or not. It'll be so easy to turn around and say 80 million ballots sent out. We don't know who they were. Look at all the dead people they were sent to. Look at all the people in different states that don't live in the state they were sent the ballot in. All that stuff. And then Democrats will just do what they always do. Come up with a story that makes them feel like they have right on their side. They are representative of what is really at the heart and soul of American democracy, that they're the ones who really understand. It's just, friends, it's stunning, isn't it? It's so obvious, too. And in case it wasn't obvious enough, you will recall there was a woman who was rather prominent in American politics for a time, one who is planning to just haunt you for as long as she can, to be out there appearing, giving her opinion, weighing in, no matter what we do, no matter how clear it is that the American people do not want to hear from her anymore. Hello! She is still out there, folks. Hillary Clinton is a part of this whole saga. And she wants the Democrat voters of America to know, well, here's what she says about the sanctity of our elections and how we should be treating all this play.
So we've got to have a massive legal operation. And I know the Biden campaign is working on that. We have to have poll workers, and I urge people who are able to be a poll worker. We have to have our own teams of people to counter the force of intimidation that the Republicans and Trump are going to put outside polling places. This is a big organizational challenge, but at least we know more about what they're going to do. And, Joe Biden should not concede under any circumstances, because I think this is going to drag out, and eventually I do believe he will win if we don't give an inch.
Let's be very clear about this. She said, you heard her, Joe Biden should not concede under any circumstances. What this really means is Hillary Clinton is telling the Democrat voter, the Democrat base, the 40% of people who will vote Democrat no matter what. Doesn't matter. If we found out that Joe Biden is actually, a lizard king from the space planet Zargon or something, they would still think like, well, Joe Biden, he gets it done, and they'd vote for him. They just don't care. But what Hillary is telling Democrat voters is no matter what, you heard her, no matter what, Biden should, quote, not concede under any circumstances. They are planning a legal fight before it's clear that they would have any reasonable grounds to do so. This is lawfare as a backup plan to an election. That's what they are preparing. That's what they're doing. And they've already tried this before. Al Gore in 2000, lawfare in place of an election. And then in 2016, it was stealth prosecution via the deep state as remember, an insurance policy, as Peter Strzok memorably said, an insurance policy. That's what they were running against Trump in the event that he won. But then he did win. And now the insurance policy has begun to come apart. I've got to tell you, my prediction still about the Durham investigation looking pretty good. This prosecution of Kleinsmith, this guy's going to get a slap on the wrist and nothing's really going to happen. Just telling you. Those of you, because people say, Buck, well, you've got to have the faith. I have the faith, but I know the system too. I know how the federal government works. And somehow the bureaucracy has an almost lethal allergy to true accountability. Bureaucracies hate that. And so they will just, by their nature, by their culture, by their functioning, always find a means to sweep things under the rug and to move forward. As long as their pay and prerogatives are protected, nothing else matters. That is the essence of, especially federal, but really any bureaucracy. So don't expect the insurance policy of Strzok and Page and Clapper and Comey and all the rest of them to end up with anyone getting clapped in irons, so to speak. Not going to happen. Oh, it has been amazing to watch the difference in coverage already between the DNC, when all the journalists were, that was the most amazing Biden speech / all the speeches, like Bernie and all the speeches just made me cry, versus the way they approached the RNC. This is a classic New York Times headline. Election updates. Trump opens RNC with boasts on economy and attacks on Biden. If you actually were an honest person watching the RNC, you would come out and say it was really about American greatness. It was about, this is a fantastic country. We're lucky to be here. We love this country. We want to make sure that it's as good for all of its citizens, all the people here, as it possibly can be. And there was just a spirit of optimism and promise in all of it. The Democrat convention was a lot of Trump has killed everybody with COVID and is worse than Hitler, and it's awful, and the only thing that will save us is Joe Biden. The only thing that will bring us together is Joe Biden. Now, we all understand the media is never going to give up this game, at least not, I don't think, in my lifetime, where the journos pretend that they have an objective perspective in there that is reflected in their reporting. But this is one of my favorites. Some places, I think MSNBC was doing this, and CNN as well. They fact check Republicans in real time for their audience. They fact check, but they don't do that with Democrats. Oh, because Bernie Sanders is so on the money all the time with the stuff that he says.
You will create 20 bajillion new jobs by making money out of thin air / taxing billionaires.
Oh, okay. Those 20 bajillion jobs that you'll create in green energy by taking even more money from wealthy people. Okay, sure. That's going to work out really well. But here's Bro Cuomo, or as as Tucker Carlson calls him, CNN's chief weightlifting correspondent. Here he is on the fact check controversy. Play 4.
But that's politics, Don. You're running for this party. I'm demonizing this party. Everything that's bad is your fault. Everything that's not going well on my watch, you're either lying about or you're engineering somehow on the sneaky side. And again, well, who are people going to believe? We'll see who makes the better case. And yeah, you can fact check it to death. We could fact check this convention all night. People who are saying you didn't fact check the Democrats, they are not lying the way Trump does. Yeah. Do politicians lie? Yes. Of course. Do both parties engage in it? Yes, I'll give you the full guilfoyle. Yeah. But not like Donald Trump. Yeah. Nobody lies the way this man does, has, and will that I've ever seen in politics. Yeah. So he's lying to you.
Really, someone should ask if you like your health care plan, can you keep your health care plan? Oh, yeah. Now, this is the game that's always played. They skip to Trump lies, and that justifies improper behavior on the part of the journos covering him. Okay, sure, we've shown our hand here. We're going to fact check one side and not the other. Why not fact check the other side and show how it's all truthful? Why not do that? Oh, because then they would have to have their little fingers in the media on the fact checker button for all these Democrats, and people would realize, well, the Democrats are full of crap. There's a lot of stuff they say that's also just not true, or that's speculation. And the way fact checking is done in politics is always hilarious. They love to do this partially true. Whenever a Republican says something that is true but Democrats don't like, as in factually accurate but Democrats don't like it, they'll say, partially true. Yes, the figure that he gave is accurate, but what that doesn't tell you is this other thing that I want to talk about now. That's not a fact check. That's an editorial. That's why PolitiFact and all these other sites are just such a joke. But it's the same thing they do with science. They're always so desperate to think that objective reality is on their side that they distort objective reality. They distort the definition of objective reality. What is a fact becomes a point of editorial contention for liberals, because they don't like the facts that the other side uses. So they come up with, well, it's not really a fact if we don't like it. And the rest of us get dizzy and sit down and say, who are these lunatics?